Hi, this is Barry Phillips with 10-Minute Torah, Lech Lecha, day number 4. Let's go to chapter number 14, where we see an international war breakout, in our estimation, or a way of saying it, World War. This is the original World War I, if you will. And because Ivrim is who he is, living where he is living, walking in obedience, he's not immediately involved in this. He's able to live quietly outside of its realm of influence. By contrast, Lot has positioned himself in such a place he's caught up right in the middle of it. Now, in the previous chapter, it says that he pitched his tents toward Sodom. In chapter 14 and verse number 12, and they took Lot, Avram's brother's son, who dwelt in Sodom. Now, how did he get from being out on the plains that were facing Sodom to actually living in Sodom? That's a good question. According to the Phillips translation, this is how that happened. One day, Mrs. Lot went into town to do her shopping. And as she was in the shops and the stores of the great city of Sodom, she came back home with a sad tale. She said, "Lot, baby, I was shopping at the grocery store in Sodom, and people were laughing at me. I went to the dress shop, and the ladies were whispering about me. And I overheard one of them say, 'She has all the money she wants, but she smells like sheep. She smells like cattle and herds.' And she said, 'I don't want to live in a tent anymore. I'm tired of sleeping on a cot in a tent surrounded by smelly sheep. Let's sell all these blessings that we have, and I found us a nice place in town. We can live conveniently in town.' And wanting to please his beautiful wife, Lot said, 'Okay, we can do that.' He divested himself of the lifestyle of Avram and became his own man, moved into town, and later on we'll see that he's sitting in the gate. Maybe he has bought himself a place of influence and prestige. His wife and daughters no longer smell like flocks and herds, and they can conveniently walk down the street to where they want to shop and where they want to go with the security of a wall around them. All is well until world upset and upheaval begins to take place. You and I are living in a place of exile, and we need to understand who we are in exile. Are we a citizen of the exile, or are we a captive who is longing to go home? If you and I will sell out to this present world system, then we're going to get caught up in what's coming. I'm not trying to be a prophet about bad news or bad things. I'm just saying world leaders are world leaders. The pattern of world conflict has not changed throughout the annals of history. It is a consistent fact that nations will rise up against nations and they will go to war. There's going to be some means of upset. The economies will rise and they will fall. Blessings and prosperity turn into times of lack and need. It's just an endless cycle. Where will you find yourself in the middle of whatever the next conflict is going to be? So we read here in verse number 13 for the very first time, "And one who had escaped came and informed Ivrim ha-Ivri," the Hebrew. Our Jewish brothers will say that Abraham was the first Jew. Well, Yehuda, who is the first Jew, was not born yet. Avram is Hebrew, one who has crossed over. Lot did not cross over. He stayed inside. He stayed where it was convenient. He stayed where it was comfortable. He stayed where he was accepted. He stayed where he thought himself to have a name and prestige. Avram crossed over. Maybe he was viewed as an isolationist. I've been accused as much. You're hiding yourself in that little building with just that handful of people. You should be out preaching to a larger crowd, etc. I'm not an isolationist. I'm trying to be an obedient follower of Messiah. Let's put it very plainly. Crowds, numbers, large buildings do not necessarily indicate that you have crossed over and are abundantly blessed. Not speaking against those things. If you've got a large congregation and a building large enough to hold them, and you're doing things in obedience to the Torah, I applaud you. If you're all by yourself, you have no other congregation to meet with, you're not an isolationist. You're seeking to be obedient. You're trying to walk correctly. I applaud you. Let's get out of the mentality of buildings and how many are inside. That's irrelevant to us. Obedience is where we're trying to walk. Obedience is what we're trying to capture. So one would say, perhaps Avram, when he heard about Lot's predicament, maybe he should just say, well, he made his bed, let him lay in it. Maybe he said, well, when he's in prison, as a prisoner of war, I'll go visit him and I'll take him some soup. Would you be willing to neglect the opportunity to preach him a sermon entitled, I Told You So? This very well may be for us a very prophetic scene where you and I are reluctantly going to be brought into the conflict of parties. Living in exile, we cannot live under a rock. We cannot hide in our closets or in our safe houses and pretend that where we live doesn't exist, that we're only going to come out of hiding when the kingdom comes. Unfortunately, even though we have spiritually crossed over physically, we're where we have been. In my heart, in my mind, in my spirit, I've already crossed over. My affection for the land of Israel is intense, and I yearn to be there with the King. But we're not there yet. We may get caught up in the middle of a conflict or 10. And we're going to have to endure those days, rescuing those who can be rescued, doing what we can out of compassion. Avram could have thrown up his hands in frustration and said, you know what, I told him. I warned him. He was stubborn. He wouldn't listen. That all may be true. But if we can rescue someone, if we can deliver someone, even if they do not walk it out, even if they turn from it in days after, it is our calling and our purpose to rise up and do what we can for those that we can, as long as we can. Being found faithful, being found doing the Master's bidding until the time comes that we leave the exile and are transferred, transformed, translated, however it's going to happen, and we come to the land. I'd like to keep my hands clean and out of the dirty business of the exile. Probably not possible. We get dirty, but we keep ourselves washed. It's frustrating, but that's what Abraham did, and we're his children, so we're going to do what Abraham did. We'll talk more about this tomorrow on day number 4. Shalom.